right, welcome back everyone. As you can see, I started the recording this time. I did not start it on time for Richard Stanley's talk. You probably noticed that. We'll see what we can do to recover from that. But if in the future, I am hoping to record each and every talk as long as the speaker does give permission, and then they'll have the chance to review it after the recording, and we'll post it up on YouTube as soon as possible. So it's my pleasure to now introduce Guillaume Chapuis. He's going to be talking about Jack polynomials, non-orientable branch covers. Oh, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Did you hear what I just said?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So I'm carrying on. We're introducing Jack polynomials, non-orientable branch covers, and the B conjecture. Take it away, Guillaume.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the organizers for organizing this event despite the conditions. Well, in fact, I changed my title a little bit. I talk about Jack polynomials, non-orientable maps, and B positivity. Everything I will say is joint work with Maciek Dołęga from Krakow. It's something we started in FIPSAC 2017. It took a long time to complete all the proofs, and the paper appeared on arXiv today. So if you want to look at it, you can, after my talk, you can look at the paper. Okay, so I'll talk about a link between Jack polynomials, which are symmetric functions, and some topological objects called maps. So I will start with symmetric functions. I assume everyone already knows better than me, but I will quickly recap symmetric functions. So I look at symmetric function in some underlying variables xi. We know that the natural bases of these vector space are indexed by integer partitions, for example, the monomial symmetric functions m lambda. And then, I mean, when you learn algebraic combinatorics, you start by learning the different bases of symmetric functions. So the first one for me will be the power sums. So the power sum pk is the sum of the xi to the k. It's obviously symmetric. And I have a typo here. P lambda is defined multiplicatively over the parts of the partition. So P lambda is P lambda 1, P lambda 2, up to P lambda L of lambda, where L of lambda is a number of parts. So the P lambdas are a basis of the space of symmetric function, a vector space basis. And they enable me to define the scalar product, which is important for several reasons. So I define a scalar product on the set of symmetric functions, which is, for which the power sum are orthogonal, and for which the square norm of P lambda is this quantity Z lambda here. So Z lambda is, if lambda is a partition of size n, it is n factorial divided by the number of permutations whose cycle type is lambda in the nth symmetry. Okay, so this is the whole scalar product. And then I come to Schur functions. So one possible definition of Schur functions is using this scalar product. So I build a basis of symmetric function by asking it to be orthonormal for this scalar product. So orthogonal with norm 1, and triangular with respect to the monomial. So S lambda is M lambda plus some smaller mu's, where by smaller, I mean smaller for the dominance order. Okay, so this is Schur function. This definition works. I mean, there is a unique family of symmetric functions with this property. They are important, as you know, for many reasons. Okay, then when you learn symmetric function, you learn about change of bases between the different bases. And so when you go from Schur to power sums, the coefficients turn out to be the characters of the symmetry group. So if I express the Schur function S lambda in terms of the power sums P mu, I can do that because they are bases. And the coefficient that appear is essentially chi lambda mu, where chi lambda is a character of the permutation of type mu acting on the representation of the symmetry group indexed by lambda. Okay. And here I use maybe some non-standard notation for you. It's the standard physics notation. I've used the Schur function as a function of the power sum variables. So in fact, in all my talk, I will forget about the variables xi. For me, the variables are the pk. And when I write S lambda of P, I mean S lambda viewed as a polynomial in the variables pk. So this polynomial here. Okay. So by the way, I do not see the chat anymore now that I'm speaking. So Svante, you have to interrupt me. There is something going on. something bad going on.
I will.
Okay, so these are Schur functions. Okay, so something maybe a little bit more complicated is Jack polynomials. So the Polish definition is that Jack polynomials are Schur functions under steroids. If you've seen Piotr Snady talk about them, he always uses this. And more precisely, what you're going to do, you're going to build a one-parameter deformation of Schur functions by deforming the scalar product. So you define this deformed scalar product by taking the same scalar product as before, but just you put alpha to the length of lambda, so alpha to the number of parts of lambda when you define it over the power source. And here alpha is a parameter. So you have a one parameter deformation of the previous product, and then you keep the definition of Schur functions. So you look at the family of polynomials, so that they are the Jack polynomials. They are indexed by this parameter alpha and by a partition, and you want them to be a basis of the space of symmetric functions, which are orthogonal for the scalar product and triangular with respect to the monomials. And these are the Jack polynomials. So there are several sorts of normalization in the literature. So for me, I choose these normalization coefficients here. They are explicit. I could tell you what they are, but I don't want to. I just choose them so that the coefficient of P1 to the n in my polynomial is 1. This is just the normalization. Okay, so these are the Jacks. So for so here's an example. For example, Jack parameter 3,1. It's a symmetric function. It's a polynomial in the power sums, but this alpha parameter shows up. Okay, so for alpha equals 1, I've not done anything. I just have the usual scalar product. So the Jacks are the Schur, except that because of this weird choice of normalization that I made, they are in fact the normalized Schur. So I note S tilde, the Schur function normalized by the product of hooks. So the Schur function normalized by this condition. So for alpha equals 1, you essentially have Schurs. And well, there is at least one other point where Jack polynomials are interesting, which is for alpha equals 2. For alpha equals 2, they are called the zonal polynomials. And I will not really tell you what this means because, in fact, I don't really need it. But so the zonal polynomial is also has a representation theoretic interpretation. It is related to the representation of the Gelfand pair formed by the symmetric group of size 2n with Bn, in the same way as the Schur function is related to representation theory of Sn. So my point here is that you have a one parameter deformation of Schur, and there is another point which is alpha equal 2 for which you have some nice representation theoretic interpretation. Okay, so now I will tell you about maps. I will come back to Jack polynomials later. So I will define maps, or more precisely bipartite maps on orientable surfaces. So you take an orientable surface, for example, a torus or a sphere or a double torus, and a bipartite map is a bipartite graph embedded on this surface with edges labeled from 1 to n with simply connected faces and considered up to homomorphisms. So this is a topological definition, but these are important objects in algebraic combinatorics. And one reason for that is that, in fact, they can be encoded by permutations. So when you have such an object, you can form two permutations. So sigma white is the permutation that gives you the order of the edges around the white vertices. By order, I mean the counterclockwise order. For example, on my example around this vertex, you see labels 5, 6, 7 in counterclockwise order, and this corresponds to cycles 5, 6, 7 in my permutation sigma white. We do the same for black vertices, and then the cool fact is that the product of these two permutations, sigma black, sigma white, can be interpreted as giving you the order of the edges around faces. So here, this map, for example, has two faces, and you have two cycles in the product permutation. And in fact, this is a bijection. So a bipartite map is the same thing as a triple of permutation in the symmetric group Sn, whose product is identity. Okay, so now you may want to count these objects, and it's not easy. So if you want to count, for example, the triple of permutations is a symmetric group whose product is the identity and of given cycle type, it's not a trivial problem. It is a problem that is solved in an abstract way by a representation theory of groups. So if you fix any finite group, and if you look at the number of factorization of the identity in a given number of factors of given conjugacy classes, well, you have an abstract answer in terms of the irreducible characters of the group. And as a consequence, you have the following formula, which I call the character formula for the map generating function. So what do I have here? So on the left-hand side, I have the generating function of all bipartite maps. So all factorization like this. So I put a weight Tn over n factorial, where n is the index of the symmetric group. And then for each of my 3 permutations, I put power sums in some alphabet. So I put power sums pi marking cycles of length I in the first permutation, power sums qj marking cycles of length j in the second permutation, and power sums rk marking cycles of length k in the third permutation. Okay, so I view them as 3 independent sets of variables, and I form this big generating function. And on the right-hand side, what do I have? I have a sum over all integer partition. And I have inside the sum, well, I have this hook coefficient and then the product of 3 Schur functions, 1 in each alphabet. Okay? So it's pretty cool. And the proof is that, I mean, I showed you at the beginning that if you expand S lambda in terms of the p's, then the coefficients are characters. So if you expand each of these 3 Schur functions, then here you get a big linear combination of products of characters. But then if you open a book of representation theory and you look at the Frobenius formula, it is exactly what you need. Okay, so the correspondence really goes through this idea that bipartite maps are just factorizations, and factorizations can be counted by characters. So by the way, so this formula, I think has been overlooked by the bijective community. So it should be possible to give a bijective proof of this because you have tableaus on one side and maps on the other side. And as far as I know, I mean, this is an open question. I mean, and maybe I will give partial answers incidentally in this talk. Okay, so this formula will be very important for us. So I need something a bit annoying, but it's important. So in fact, people who study maps prefer to work with rooted maps. So what's a rooted map compared to a map? It's essentially the same definition, but I don't put labels on all edges. I just remember the position of the edge labeled 1, and I call it the root edge. So this was like a bipartite map in the more general definition, but for a rooted map, I just remember where 1 is. And also I ask the surface to be connected, which was not the case in my previous definition. And well, then I can write my character formula for rooted map. So it's almost the same formula, except that I have to take the logarithm of the function in order to get connected objects from unconnected ones. And I have to take a derivative for the root. And what's nice in this formula is that no, on the left-hand side, you don't have an exponential generating function anymore because the objects are not labeled. You just have an ordinary generating function. And in particular, this function has integer coefficients. Okay, so if you know Schur functions very well and you look at the right-hand side and someone asks you to prove that this big linear combination of Schur function when you take the logarithm as integer coefficients, it's not obvious, but the good way to prove it is to recognize that it is in fact the generating function of rooted maps. Okay, so far I told you that, I mean, we have these nice bipartite maps on surfaces, and I can form their generating functions, and because of character magic, I can express them in terms of Schur functions. Okay. Now I will tell you something a bit more complicated. So I'm interested in considering maps in more general things which are non-orientable surfaces. Okay, so when I say non-orientable surfaces, I want to say non-necessarily orientable surfaces. So this includes the previous case as well. So what's a non-orientable surface? It's just, I mean, it's a two-manifold, so it looks locally like a disk, but you cannot put a global orientation. So for a canonical example is a Klein bottle, like here. You can try to put it in 3 space with self-intersection according to this standard drawing. So you can define maps in the same way on non-orientable surfaces, and they are not too bad. In particular, if you look around the vertex, I mean, you see a disk. So the picture looks very similar to the orientable case. The only difference is that now it does not make sense to talk about the counterclockwise or the clockwise order because your surface is not oriented. But still, I mean, you can try if you're patient enough to encode everything by permutations, except that you will find an encoding that is defined up to change of local orientations everywhere. So you have to make some choices, and in the end, you have to quotient by these choices that are irrelevant. So you get something that is a bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So you will still be able to encode your maps as some sort of factorizations, but it will not be factorizations of permutations anymore. It will be factorization in something that is a quotient because of this need of quotienting by local orientations. And if you do the job, you find that its factorization is this double coset algebra. So the S2n quotiented by the hyperoctahedral group on each side. So I don't want to be very precise here, but the message is that I told you at the beginning that the zonal polynomials, so the Jack for alpha equals 2, have some representation theoretic interpretation. And in fact, it is precisely the one you need. It is representation theory of this object. And because of that, the same character magic works. And you find this non-orientable character formula. So I think it's due to Goulden and Jackson in '96, but I mean, the connection between these zonal polynomials and non-orientable maps appears in the context of matrix model in a famous paper of Hanlon, Stambridge, and the previous speaker in '92. So it's almost the same formula, except that here on the left-hand side, now I have maps on any surface. So maybe they are orientable, maybe not. So maybe they live on the Klein-Bottom, for example. And on the right, instead of short, I have zonal polynomials. Okay. So I mean, same question as before. You may want to find more direct proof, non-character-based proof of this formula, but as far as I know, they don't exist. Okay, and so now it becomes quite amazing if you put the two formulas next to each other. So this is the non-orientable formula, and this is the orientable formula that I was showing on the previous slide, except that I rewrote it from Schur to Jack notation. And you see that they are the same, right? So the Schurs become Jacks of parameter 1, and here you have Jacks, the zonals are Jacks of parameter 2. And here you have orientable, and here you have orientable or not. Okay, so maybe Goulden and Jackson were the first ones to contemplate these two formulas next to each other. And when you see that, I mean, clearly there is something going on. I mean, it cannot be that you have this only for these two special values of alpha, right? You don't want to believe that. Maybe there's something for alpha equals 3 or alpha equals, I don't know, -1. I mean, you want something more general to hold. And well, this is the subject of this big conjecture that I'm going to show right now. So I will try to think about a statement that would encompass these two. Okay, so that would have these two as special cases. And so this is this B positivity thing. So the Goulden-Jackson B conjecture in the same paper by Goulden-Jackson goes as follows. You take this generating function, so it is the same as in the previous slide, except that now the Jack polynomials are in parameter alpha equals 1 plus B, where B is an indeterminate. And so you just put, every time you have 2 for the zonals, you put 1 plus B. And the conjecture is that this generating function, so you expand it in P, Q, R, and you have coefficients which depend on B. It's not even clear that they are polynomials in B, but they are. And in fact, the coefficients are non-negative integers, okay, what I call B positivity. And they count by particle. It's pretty amazing. Well, in fact, because you know that for B equals 1, it's true, you can reformulate the conjecture equivalently as follows. This big generating function here, what is it? Well, in fact, it is a generating function of bipartite rooted maps, orientable or not. So you count them with their natural parameters, so T to the size, and then you have power sums P lambda white, Q lambda black, R lambda face, marking the 3 natural parameters, black, white, vertex degrees, and face degrees of your map. But in addition to that, you have B to some integer, where this integer nu of M is attached to a map M, and it is 0 if and only if the map is orientable. This is a Goulden-Jackson B conjecture. So they do not tell you what this nu of M has to be, but they conjecture that it exists and that such a formula holds. And so if it's true, then you recover the 2 previous formulas, because if you said B equals 0 because of this B to the nu of M, you will keep only maps which are such that the nu is 0, so you get the orientable picture. And if you put b equals 1, this b to the new of m becomes irrelevant, and you just get everything, orientable or not, and you get the zonal character. So it interpolates between the zonal character and the Schur character formulas. And of course, the reason why you believe it to be true is because you can put this in Maple easily and check, and you see that indeed it's true. The coefficients are non-negative integers. Okay. So it's a pretty cool statement, and it's more than 20 years old, and it's interesting because we have essentially no tools to attack it. So for b equals 0 and 1, the proofs are well understood, but they are specific to the existence of character technology. For general value of b, there is nothing like this, and in fact, very little is known. Progress has been very rare. So the most general result so far is a result of Michael Lacroix. It tells you the following, that it's true under some specialization. So instead of keeping a full set of variables pi and qi and ri, where you keep the pi's, what I call times. So you keep one full set of times, but then you keep only variable q2, and then for the variable r, you do this specialization, which consists in putting all the power sums equal to the same parameter. So you have something one-dimensional instead of infinite dimensional for r. So Lacroix did this using a connection with beta ensembles, essentially due to Okunkov. And then you have other results in the literature, for example, for partitions with one parts or this sort of thing. But the progress is very rare, and the main reason is that we have no tools. So one of our results is that we can show that it holds if we keep two set of types. So we take this formula and we only specialize the third set of power sums to be equal to this u, but we keep two full sets of power sums in p and q variable, and we show that the conjecture holds. And I mean, at the conceptual level, we work with bilinear combination of jacks because we have two full jack functions surviving instead of one. So it's bilinear instead of linear. So it's really, there is really a technical gap with respect to Lacroix's result. Okay, so in fact, we do something stronger than just this. So I will tell you a bit now. So let me go back to the orientable maps. So I told you bipartite maps are the same as factorization of the identity in 3 permutations in the symmetry group. But when you see this problem, you don't see why you would not make something more general, which is consider an arbitrary number of factors. So if you fix an integer k, you can look at factorizations of the identity in the symmetry group in, say, k plus 2 permutations. So k equals 1 would be bipartite maps. And these things are well known. So these sort of permutations are also in bijection with some topological objects called constellations. So here you have one constellation. So they are not maps anymore, they are hypermaps. Instead of being bipartite, they are like k plus 1 partite or something like this. But these objects exist, they are classical. And because they count factorizations in a group, you can still use a character approach to count them. And then there is a fact which comes from mathematical physics, is that the good object, I mean the cool object to consider is the following generating function. What you want to do, so now you have this extra parameter k, and you will look at a generating function which is similar to the previous one, but now instead of having 3 Schur functions, you have k plus 2 Schur functions, so it is more general. But on the other hand, only for the first 2 of them, you keep a full set of times, full set of variables, and for the k other ones, you have this specialization here. So you recall that specialization underline u means that all the power sums are equal to u. So here for my Schur function u, for this one, and that one, I use this specialization in k variables. So in total, my variables are a full set of power sum p, a full set of power sums q, and then k additional variables. And so this is a good object to consider. It is a generating function of constellations where I track the full cycle type of the first factor, the full cycle type of the second factor, but for the k remaining factors, I keep only the number of cycles. So why do I do that? Because if I do that, this object has some very nice properties. It is, in particular, it is what we call a tau function. So it is a tau function of the KP or even the two tau hierarchy. So this means that it satisfies some very nice set of partial differential equations, which are integrable. It is parameterized by an element in the Grassmannian GL infinity. I mean, it has really deep properties, and it is well studied in particular by people doing enumerative geometry. So this is really the good object. So again, if you compare it to the generating function of bipartite maps, it is both more general and less general. It is more general because you have more than 3 factors, but it is less general because only 2 of them are allowed to have full control on their variables. But mathematical physics tells you that somehow this is the coolest object. And then here's what we did. So this is our main result. I hope it's natural given what's before. So what we do is that for given k, for arbitrary k, we consider the B deformation of the tau function. So we take the tau function and we just deform Schur functions into jacks of parameter 1 plus b. And we are able to show that this function, or more precisely, the derivative of its logarithm is B positive with integer coefficients. And the coefficients count, well, something that we call K constellations, which are the non-routable analogs of the classical K constellations with a weight, which is as in the B conjecture, so B to the something, where the something is, I mean, detects if your map is orientable or not. So of course, in the case K equals 1, this corresponds to a degenerate case of the B conjecture, which is the one I was saying before, where you have 2 full set of times. For general K, it is a priori incomparable. But I mean, in fact, our result also has 3 full set of parameters as the B conjecture, and we suspect that maybe, I mean, with some new ideas, it may be possible to use our result to attack the B conjecture. I mean, of course, we don't know, but that's one hope. And of course, for B equals 0, you recover the classical tau function from mathematical physics, which is a tau function of Kp and everything. Okay, so so as I said at the beginning, the paper took a long time to write. I mean, some parts are a bit technical. So how did you prove that? I will not tell you the full proof, but the idea is that essentially characters don't work. So you have to do something else, and in fact, we do something more concrete. Essentially, we show that both functions, so both these functions defined in terms of jacks and the generating function of constellation satisfies the same differential equations. So here is the proof. So the proof has 3 halves. So the first half is for experts of map generating functions. When you have a map, you can remove the root edge when you have a rooted map and see what happens. And if you're good at map generating functions, you can do that and write something called Tutt equations. And if you are, I mean, if you really know your subject very well, you can do it by controlling lots of parameters. So in fact, you can write some sort of root edge decomposition equation for this generating function of maps by controlling all the variables of interest. And then you can do it also in the non-routable case, and you can guess where to put the B parameter in it, and that's something you can do. So the second half of the proof is that if you are a Jack polynomial expert, you know, in particular, the famous paper of the previous speaker that gives you nice rules like Piery rule, hook content formula, action of Laplace-Beltrami operator. So you have a version of all these things for Jack polynomials. And then if you're creative enough, then you can try to apply all these rules, like I apply the Laplace-Beltrami operator, then I multiply by T1, or I do it in a different order, and I take commutators of all these things. And you manage to construct by induction a set of partial differential equations that cancel your function. So your function defined this way in terms of the jacks. And then the third half of the proof is to show that, in fact, the equations that you get there and the equations that you get here are the same. And this is, I mean, as far as, I mean, we were able to do it, difficult. So in one case, you get an explicit set of PDEs. In another case, you get some differential operators, which are defined by induction. And we have a very difficult, I mean, very technical, at least, proof that they are equal. Well, you can look at the paper if you're courageous. So that's how it works, and this is why, I mean, we cannot prove the full B conjecture because none of these two steps can be done with the three full sets of times. In particular, the combinatorial root-edge decomposition does not work if you try to control three full parameters. Okay, so we are very happy with this proof. It's much more general than what we could do before. So by the way, the paper appeared on arXiv today. Probably I said it already. We are very happy of that. So in the paper, you will find more. You will find, so in fact, you can take, in some sense, k equals infinity. You can define Hurwitz numbers or analog of Hurwitz numbers, which for symmetric proof would correspond to factorization in transpositions. So you can look at the classical problems for Hurwitz numbers like cut and join equation, quasi-polynomiality. There is a link with integrable systems with the presence of Lax equations in our proofs, which we don't really understand. If you look at the paper, you will also see that our function has many parameters, but you can specialize it to get many well-known models, such as beta ensembles, monotone Hurwitz numbers, or these sort of things. There is a formulation of the result if you don't like combinatorics, which I guess is not your case, but if you don't like constellations, you can formulate things in sort of algebrogeometric way by talking about branch coverings of the sphere. And then if you really have lots of time, you can try to read the proof of this equality between operators. And that's it. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful talk. And once again, why don't you switch to gallery view so people can clap with the reaction buttons, or they will add something in the chat. So go ahead and take a peek in the chat too. And then Svante will take over to help moderate with the questions.
Yes. Are there any questions for Guillaume?
While people are probably typing in their questions, let me just remind you, we will have a little coffee session after this talk, so stick around if you have time. And we will do breakout rooms, so people can have a sort of little bit of an analog of the coffee hour.
So the first question comes from Jeremy Boutier, and he asked if there's some connection with the beta ensembles.
Yeah, so I said that there was one, so I should know the answer. Let me see. So let me try to. Can you still see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So essentially, so beta ensemble combinatorially, it corresponds to the case of maps. So not bipartite maps, but just maps. And you have one full set of times. So you want to control like the distribution of white vertices. So yes, I should. So it is this case here. So if you look at bipartite maps and you set Q, so here you set Q equals delta I2, which means that you have only black vertices of degree 2. So you only have maps. I mean, you only have. You can transform the black vertices into edges, and so you now have maps with only white vertices, and their degrees are remembered by the parameters pi. So what you have is a B deformation of the generating function of maps, and it corresponds essentially to the expansion of beta ensembles. So if you look at beta ensembles, as you know, because Jeremy is asking the question, so if you look at the so beta ensemble are a certain matrix model. If you put some potential into it and you look at the expansion, then what you get are map generating functions with control of the vertex degrees, and it's essentially the same thing.
Okay, so we have, thank you for that. We have two more questions. The first one from François Barcheron. If you've tried to lift this to other symmetric functions with more parameters, such as Macdonald polynomials.
So okay, I'm not an expert in Macdonald polynomials. What I know is that, I mean, this conjecture has been around for more than 20 years. And as far as I know, people have tried to put Macdonald polynomials in the formulas, and they were never able to see anything, as far as I know. So there is no conjecture about McDonald polynomials. There is also maybe a more philosophical answer, is that physicists would not expect some local model to hold for McDonald polynomials. So for example, I mean, you don't have something, I mean, for matrix models, you can add one parameter and you get beta ensembles, and people know that this somehow consists in deforming Schur function into JAX. There exists some exotic deformations where you have McDonald polynomials, but they correspond to models where the graphs have weights which are not local anymore. So it makes them very unnatural. So if something existed in full generality, it would have to be some model a priori with non-local interactions. So maybe it exists, but no one has been able to conjecture it so far.
So then we have two more questions about refinements from John Shreshin, I believe. If you can do a
so the yes. So homeomorphism type. So surfaces are classified. So if you look at connected surfaces, which is the case here, they are classified by the genus, right? I mean, so you only need to know the Euler characteristic of the surface in order to know the surface, and the Euler characteristic is contained in the parameter, because from the Euler formula, or say the Riemann-Hurwitz formula, if you know the number of vertices and the number of faces and the number of edges, you know the genus. And in each of the specializations I have looked at, including this sort of generalization of specialization there, I always control the number of parts of the partitions of the permutations I'm looking at. So I always control the Euler characteristics. So the answer is that it's not a refinement, it's already there. The genus of the map, either orientable genus or non-orientable genus, is contained in these monomials.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So Anton Mellit asked if you can define the new statistic. And I assume he means the...
So this B parameter. Yes, so if I was well prepared, I would have a slide for this. So yes, so it's a classical idea. I'm not the first one. I mean, we are not the first one to do that. It was already the case in Lacroix. So essentially, our equations work by rootage decomposition. So they are quite complicated because we want to control all the parameters, and we have these colors in the case of constellation and everything. But essentially, what you do is you take a map and you remove the rootage, and then you do this recursively on each smaller component. And when you do that at every step, you have several topological cases that can appear. So they are here on my picture. Sometimes you disconnect the map, sometimes you add a handle, sometimes you add a twisted handle, sometimes you add a diagonal, sometimes you add a twisted diagonal. And if you just do enumeration of orientable maps, you never have these two red cases. If you do enumeration of maps on all surfaces, you have all of them, but what we do is very simple. We just put a weight B for these two cases. And the map that you get at the end is orientable if and only if you have never seen either that or that. So this gives this property that the exponent of B is 0 if and only if the map is orientable. So this is a pretty standard idea. It is a weird statistic. In particular, it is not an invariant of the map. It is an invariant of the rooted map. So it's written here. If you change the location of the root, and if for the same map you do the rootage decomposition in different order, you will get a different power of B. I mean, you may get a different power of B. So it's not a topological invariant. It is something which is more complicated, which is in fact one of the technical difficulty in working with this invariant.
Okay, thank you. So, so there's John Shreshin has another question about refinement about the monodromy group. If you can control that.
I don't know what the monodromy group is. I mean, which monodromy group?
Okay, I guess that is a...
Maybe this is a question for a later discussion.
Yes, for later discussion, yeah.
Maybe the answer is yes, but I mean, since I don't understand the question, probably it's no.
Okay, then that's it, Sarah. So
okay, well, thanks again, Guillaume, for a very nice talk. And here, Svante and I can applaud. So this has been a great first day. Thanks again to Richard and Guillaume for getting us started. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we're going to go on to the coffee hour.